that trauma, those traumatic events are continuous. And so we can't say, I was in middle school when Columbine happened, right? And so I can pinpoint that one event. But these students today, it's like there was an event last week and they saw something else on Twitter the week before and on Snapchat the week before. And so like this continuous trauma and the impact that it's having on our community.
Good morning, I'm your host Will Melton, and today we have Taikein Cooper, the Executive Director of the Richmond Public Schools Education Foundation, and we're going to talk about young people in our community today and how they have an influence on the future of our community, along with a host of other topics. You are listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. If you have not yet visited americashealthiestcity.com, please take a moment to check out the ideas board. Submit your own ideas, leave comments on the ideas that have been submitted, and if you represent an academic institution, a government agency, a business, or a nonprofit that is interested in seeing Richmond become the healthiest community in America by 2033, please take a look and see what it takes to become an ambassador. It doesn't cost anything, and we will work to tell your story about how you're making Richmond region a healthier place. So we can all do it together. Check out americashealthiestcity.com. Now, without further ado, I want to bring on Taikein. Taikein, thanks so much. We'll just say that one more time. The Richmond Public Schools Education Foundation Executive Director. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you because it's not been the easiest end to the school year in Richmond, and I'm sure that is on top of everybody's mind as we sit here and talk. We'll get into that a little bit later, but before we do, I want to give folks an opportunity to learn a little bit about who you are, because you are new to the role. You came in February of this year, 2023.
Yes.
So why don't we start with the question I ask everybody: are you a native to Richmond, or did you come here later in life?
No, I'm a native of Farmville, Virginia, born and raised in Prince Edward County.
Okay. All right. Well, what brought you to Richmond then?
Work, actually. Right before I was at the Richmond Public Schools Education Foundation, had the pleasure of leading Virginia Excels, which is a statewide education advocacy org. It's based out of Richmond.
Okay, wonderful. And I see you are a UNC Chapel Hill graduate. Tell us a little bit about your studies down there.
Phenomenal time. I was there for the 2009 National Championship, which is a really important context. Actually, my first year at UNC, I really disliked it. I thought it was cliquish. An interesting thing about all public schools in the state of North Carolina, 82% of admitted students have to be from the state. It's state law, and so a lot of folks knew other people, and I was there by myself in Farmville. But over time, I built a community, and it's one of the better decisions I've made in my life.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, nothing like flipping your world upside down, going to a strange place, and trying to make something of yourself. So you did make something of yourself shortly after college. You ran for treasurer of Prince Edward County. That's not something most 24-year-olds would take on. What motivated that decision?
So I've always been interested in public service in one way or another. We had a special election after the 2012 presidential election, and I said, hey, let's try it. Fortunately, I did not win. I think it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. But I learned more about politics and myself during those 35 days than I have in probably any other period in my life.
So, we'll talk about education, but there's that, dichotomy maybe, but also, parallel between politics and youth. You studied politics in college, and you're in youth now. What led to that maybe shift, or maybe you wouldn't describe it as a shift? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think for better or for worse, this is who I am. So actually, this is my 24th election cycle in Virginia politics. I started at 11 years old. My DARE teacher was running for county sheriff, and I told my parents that he was a good man and I needed to support him. So my parents have always been big proponents of project-based learning and experimental learning. So they dropped me off at his campaign meetings as an 11-year-old. And so I'm knocking on doors, I'm making phone calls, I'm championing this man to become the sheriff of Prince Edward County. Unfortunately, he won. And I've just been stuck in politics ever since that point.
Well, that's a big win for somebody who's 11 years old. I imagine you must have felt really elated to have that happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. I felt like I was part of something that was larger than myself. And, I think that's what we have to make. As we talk about public service and politics, we have to make it real for everyone in some way or another.
So you moved on, didn't move on, obviously. You're still involved in politics, but you went and became a substance abuse counselor. What led to that, and kind of how does that integrate with where you've ended up today?
Graduated college in 2010. The economy was upside down. Most of my peers decided to further their education at the time. And I really wanted to enter the workforce and learn some stuff first. And so what we ended up doing, it was an opportunity, and I said, hey, like this will really help me build my communication skills, primarily because there will be 1,000 men here every single day who come from all different walks of life. And I think I really developed a muscle there of building rapport with people from any and everywhere, all types of backgrounds.
So before we go a little bit deeper into the subject of education and young folks, I want to just take a quick pause and remind folks that they're listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. We've got Taikein Cooper from the Richmond Public Schools Education Foundation. And, you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot in politics. You've seen a lot in mental health. You've worked with young people. It's a tough world out there. And, we were kind of kicking things off a little bit, talking about the way that the school year ended in Richmond and the tragedy that struck graduation ceremony outside the Altria Theater. And, we could all make this a conversation about guns and lots of other things, but I think that one of the things that we've talked a lot on the show about is mental health. And, it's obvious that it's not just young people who are affected by mental health crises. Can you speak at all to both your experience and some understanding that we might be able to achieve as it surrounds mental health, and what people are facing, what young people are facing today that we really need to get behind and figure out those keys? I'm not asking you to solve our problems, but any insights that you can offer to kind of help us put some context around this would be great.
Yeah, so in some ways, I kind of push back on the narrative that we just have to address mental health, because research shows us that the overwhelming majority of people who are suffering from a mental health diagnosis, they aren't like killing people and weaponizing weapons, right? But I think that there are a couple of things there. Like one, we definitely have to get back to finding ways to solve problems without weapons. And so communication and as cliche as it has become, like how do we practice kindness and give each other grace? So I think that's part of it. Guns are a big part of it. And I think the other thing is, like, as we talk about the tragedy at Altria, like how do we support folks? And as much as we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically young people in our city, but across the country, that trauma, those traumatic events are continuous. And so we can't say, I was in middle school when Columbine happened, right? And so I can pinpoint that one event. But these students today, it's like there was an event last week and they saw something else on Twitter the week before and on Snapchat the week before. And so like this continuous trauma and the impact that it's having on our community.
Well, I was going to ask about social media next, because that certainly is the big difference between when we were young people and today. Certainly the proliferation of these events has grown, as have the proliferation of guns. But social media has been really at the forefront of our communications ecosystem across the country and across the world. And I can't help but to think that, in the busy world that we have today, it's really difficult for parents and educators and mentors of young people to monitor everything that's going on out there. And young people have a ton of freedom to communicate. And so, my brain is going toward, supporting young people. You're not going to be able to take social media away. There's certain things that you just really can't undo in society. What are some ways in your mind that folks out there could support young people, whether they're parents or not? Is it really all of our responsibilities to take care of these folks?
Yes, and there have been some conversations I've been privy to on the government side, public sector, like what can they do to add some guardrails to social media, and I'm sure I'll have to tell you, but another part of that is like data taxation and like data mining that a lot of these social media companies are doing. But yes, I think it's a responsibility of all of us, the community at large, to definitely change the trajectory of social media.
I happen to be scrolling my Instagram feed as we talk about social media, and I saw this video about young people in Japan. Apparently, kids under the age of 10 have the freedom to walk around, and what they do there is they put yellow hats on these young people, youngest people, both for safety and crosswalks so people can see them, but also it's a collective responsibility of society to make sure that these young people are cared for. And the person who did this story was sitting on a subway, and they sat across from a young person and a woman, and they assumed that it was a mother and a child. But the kid got up off the subway at the end of the stop and just left, and it was like, wait, what's going on here? They challenged the question of why did we choose such a different way? I had the opportunity the other day to speak to the board president of Big Brothers Big Sisters, Megan Barbarta. I'm probably going to say her name wrong, but in any event, mentorship is, I think, another way, and that's something that my wife's currently exploring, to be able to think about ways that we can impact young people. I don't have any kids, and I don't plan to have kids. I feel like I might do a disservice to any young people out there if I did have kids, as busy as my life is. What other things could we be thinking about as individuals and as a community? Maybe there's some edges to some of those conversations that you've been privy to that might reveal some potential solutions.
So first, going back to your point about the yellow hats in Japan, I think a big part of it is that's just the antithesis of who we are in America, and so we don't envision like this collective responsibility of supporting kids at large. But I think mentorship is a big key, and we actually talked about my experience at the prison. That was one of the things that really stood out to me. Remember, so the interesting thing about Indian Creek Correctional Center where I worked, every man there would be released in 30 months or less. And so you had some men who had been incarcerated for 30 years and some men who essentially came directly from court. But they will all be released in 2.5 years or less. But one of the things that was like really stood out to me, I remember asking a question. I was facilitating a class one day, and I said, "Why do you think you're here?" And one gentleman said to me, "Because people like you never spent time with me when I was a kid." And I asked him to elaborate, and he shared that quote-unquote professional guys never spent time with inner city kids. They would drive past maybe once a year. They take them to a Norfolk Tide game or an AHL game in Norfolk. I forget the name of the team. But there wasn't a meaningful connection there. And he said it was more so the professional guys were doing it for themselves and making themselves feel good. Like, hey, I mentor these kids in Park Place, which Park Place is the equivalent of like the Big Six in Richmond, low-income housing communities. He said that it was more so they were doing it for their own ego and pride instead of like really trying to build meaningful relationships with the kids. And so I think we have to meet kids where they are, and we have to create these meaningful relationships and empower them to pursue success as they see fit. And so one of those stories, One of those stories that gentleman shared that day was that he never had a decent pair of shoes. He came from single parent home. He had 5 or 6 siblings, and he said that his shoes were always too small. They always had holes in them, and his introduction to a life of crime was a guy from the neighborhood saying, "Hey, if you do this for me, I'll buy you a pair of shoes." And he said that was like his gateway into a number of different criminal enterprises. And that story's always stuck with me, and that's really part of my why I do what I do.
So a few weeks back, we had Robin Talpian from Shoed, which is an organization that works to put great shoes on folks young and adults. So if you've not heard of that, Shoed, RVASHOOD. Certainly, we need more folks like that out in the community working to make sure that those gateways don't exist.
You're listening to America's Healthiest City on Mike King Biz Radio Network on ESPN Richmond 106.1 and Choice 5.3.
It's covering your face.
All right, so we are here with Taikein Cooper from the Richmond Public Schools Education Foundation. This is America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Radio Network. We're talking about a tough conversation. Young people need support. Everybody needs support out there, but in order for folks to be contributing members of society and not a burden, we need to be thinking about them at a younger age. So, we talked about some things that people can be thinking about on an individual level, but, I think that, we're at this kind of precipice where folks are looking around for solutions, like real solutions, and we need to think about things, at least in my opinion, that are perhaps a little bit more drastic and jolting to be able to wake people up from the slumber that we're in. I know you've done a little bit of research, maybe a lot of research on year-round schooling. I couldn't help but to think that keeping young people engaged throughout the summer might be one way to address some of the issues that we have. And I've seen some research that suggests that in certain schools, it certainly can have a positive impact. Can you speak to what you know about that and the possibility that something like that could be a solution?
Yes, I've been a proponent of year-round school. Honestly, I can say probably since I graduated high school. It wasn't one of those things that I was a big supporter of, but I think the research speaks for itself, specifically for students of color. And I'm hoping that our school board really evaluates it here in Richmond as a possibility. And so, of course, we have a pilot project where we have an extended school year at 2 schools that's starting this summer, an additional 20 days. But honestly, our current academic calendar is based upon an agricultural system that's no longer prevalent or indicative of the environment that we live in here in Richmond.
And kind of as we talk about Richmond obviously has some problems that are unique. Being a city, being independent from the counties, and some of the history that the city faces. Is it, can you speak at all to, why Richmond specifically would be a bigger beneficiary of year-round schooling, and kind of what that tangential benefit is to the shift?
Yes, so I think part of it is our student population. Almost 70% of our student population is considered economically disadvantaged. That's the first part. And then we have historic disinvestment in our schools here in the city, primarily because of how we fund schools in the Commonwealth. We fund schools with something called the Local Composite Index, which bases, and it's a funding formula that bases our state contribution upon the assessed tax value, which means that all of the property that's tax exempt, the Federal Reserve Building, VCU, hospitals, churches, the General Assembly Building, like the state computes it in their formula saying that Richmond generates all of this revenue off of this property, but it's tax exempt. And so I think there are a number of opportunities, but there are a number of reasons why Richmond is in the situation that we're in. And I think year-round school is a great opportunity, a great thing for us to explore if this can be part of the solution.
So, before we run out of time here, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about ideas. It's going to take all of us over the next 10 years to move the needle in this direction. And we don't even know if we can do it, but we got to believe that it's worth trying. I want to give you the opportunity to you've given us so many ideas today already, but are there any other ideas that you wanted to have us add to the ideas board on americashealthiestcity.com? Small ways, big ways that we can move the needle?
I think a big part of it will be we have to engage our young people. And I think a meaningful way to do that is we're going to have to pay them to be part of this initiative. And so if I'm involved in any way, I'd definitely be a champion for finding funding to support our young folks, because I think they're the people that can really take this initiative to the next level and create the city that ultimately they will live in and that they want it to be.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up. I've had a chance to talk about that a little bit. And the ideas board on americashealthiestcity.com, 35 of the ideas that are there were submitted by young people in Henrico, Richmond, and Chesterfield County at Teen Summit earlier this year that brought together 600 kids to have that space to speak their voice and to learn about the problems that exist in the community. So we're going to keep pushing on that and finding new ways to bring young people's voices into this conversation. Another thing I wanted to make sure that we got from you is you're connected in the community, obviously, and you're doing important work. We're always looking for guests to come on this show that we can highlight and tell their story. Who's somebody that we might consider bringing onto this show?
Immediately, I would say Reggie Gordon.
Okay.
And for those of y'all who don't know, Reggie is he's the incoming CEO of the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. And I think, of course, education is a social determinant of health, but as that foundation really begins to grapple with how to make this region healthier, I think it's a great connection and a great way for Reggie to reintroduce himself to the community in this new role. He's been a deputy chief administrative officer for the city, but I think there's some synergy here and an opportunity really to build upon it.
Well, Reggie has been on my list for a couple months now for folks to reach out to, so I'm glad you brought his name up. Before we run out of time here, I want to give folks the opportunity to find you out in the community. So can you tell folks where they can find you professionally and otherwise?
Sure. So our not email address, our website is rpseducationfoundation.org, and that's spelled out. Education and foundation is spelled out. And my personal social medias, I'm Taikein Cooper everywhere. I'm the only Taikein Cooper in the world. So Taikein Cooper, Cooper.
That must be a...
Real.
All right. Well, we've got Taikein Cooper here from the Richmond Public Schools Education Foundation. We're grateful for your time and your insights. We're no doubt going to be better off for this 30 minutes with you, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
This was America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network.